Okay, and so we have two speakers today. The first is Will Barnes. He's affiliated with the university, with the American University and NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and he's presenting on sunpy, which is a community-developed, free and open source solar data analysis environment. And this project has a whole organization around it to manage the software with a board of directors, a lead developer, community roles and all that, and is open to anyone who wants to participate. And I'm sure Will tell us more about this. So would you like to share your screen, please, Will?
Sure, yes, I can do that. Let's see if it still works. Okay, so I'll do the obligatory. Can everyone see my slides? Everyone hear me okay? Okay, I see a thumbs up from Nick, so.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much for asking the sunpy project to present at these seminars. It's a great way to sort of advertise what we're doing to this wider kind of astronomy community. So yeah, my name is Will. I'm a research scientist at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, employed by American University. But more importantly, for the purposes of this talk, I'm also one of the maintainers and the deputy lead developer for the sunpy project, which I will tell you more about right now. So I just wanted to first, since this is a sort of a general astronomy seminar, I wanted to first, kind of say a little bit about what solar physics is. So solar physics is sort of a branch of astronomy, sort of also a branch of space physics that's primarily focused on studying the atmosphere of the sun, in particular the layers of the outer atmosphere, so all the way from the surface up through the outermost layer, the corona. And so you've probably seen a lot of similar movies to the ones I'm showing right now in the past couple of days because of the solar storms that have been impacting the Earth, that of course originated as coronal mass ejections from the sun. And so what this is sort of what solar physics is primarily focused on, is studying the sort of dynamics of the outer atmosphere of the sun, how the plasma is energized, how it's heated, how it erupts in the forms of things like coronal mass ejections, and then how those propagate throughout the heliosphere. And of course, the more practical side of all this is how these so-called solar storms impact life here on Earth, which we've been keenly reminded of recently. So in solar physics, much like sort of general astronomy, we have a lot of data, but wow, I misspelled dynamic. Wow, okay. Solar data are not dynamic, but dynamic. And I just wanted to sort of point all this out because I think in solar physics versus sort of general astronomy, our problems are very similar, but the shape of our data are quite different. So in solar physics, we have very, very detailed observations of a single star, and these observations are often time dependent on the scales of on sub-second time scales, as I'm showing here. This is a movie from an instrument called the Atmospheric Imaging Assembly, which images the sun in high resolution, about a 12-second cadence, in the UV wavelength ranges. So this is imaging plasma that's about 1 million degrees Kelvin. So our data are also extremely high resolution. This is a snapshot of that same active region that I was just showing, but just at one timestamp, taken actually by a sounding rocket flight. And it's one of the most high resolution UV images of the sun ever produced. And I managed to spell resolution right. So, and so this is just to point out that again, we have one star, but high time cadence, high resolution, and what this does is gives us a lot of insight into how the atmosphere of our sun is changing on these time scales and at these spatial scales. And lastly, we have a lot of different ways in which we can view the sun. So the images I was just showing were from the Solar Dynamics Observatory, which is located located in a geosync orbit here at Earth. So you can think of it as we're basically looking at the sun from the Earth, more or less. But we also have several other observatories, including Solar Orbiter, Parker Solar Probe, as well as the stereo observatories, which observe the sun in similar wavelength ranges, but at very different viewing angles. And what this allows us what this gives us is sort of a multi-viewpoint view of the sun from different viewing angles. But this also poses some challenges that I'll talk about in a second. Okay, so great, we have all this wonderful data, high resolution, high time cadence, lots of different viewing angles, great. But this sort of poses several challenges for us as solar physicists do. For one, these data are produced by lots of different groups, and as such, they're spread across many different data providers. So we have to go to different places to get this data. These data are often large, both in terms of just the single snapshots we get, but also the fact that, if I'm trying to look at a movie, for example, the one that I just showed previously, that movie is split across many different files. So if I want to assemble a large data set, I have to go download a bunch of files, stitch them all together. The data can be very heterogeneous. So by that, I mean, in general, our data are packaged as FITS files, but these different instruments follow the FITS standard to varying degrees. And this can be, again, challenging when you're trying to bring multiple data sets together. We often want to associate our data, so our images, with metadata. So we have context for what these images are, and this can be a challenge as well. And then, in particular, when it comes to these multi-viewpoint observations, these data are often expressed in very complex coordinate systems. And if we want to bring these together, or if we want to co-locate features from different viewing angles, we have to think about the coordinate systems that these are expressed in, and this can be a challenge as well. In terms of the software, since this is what we're all here to talk about, in solar physics, we have a bunch of different instruments, which is great. And the software to deal with each of those instruments is typically developed by instrument teams, often on a best effort basis. Historically, this is certainly improving, but historically, there's not been a lot of funding for data analysis software for particular instruments. This development has, again, this is improving, but historically this development has not been coordinated across instrument teams. So you may have two instruments that sort of function very similarly, have differences in their design, but are measuring similar things, and they may be developing completely different stacks of software. So if you switch from one to the other, you have to relearn the kind of software that you want to use. And then, of course, this is astronomy, so a lot of this has traditionally been written in IDL with this core code base that's called SSW that we use in solar physics, though there is a strong transition to Python. And so the solution to a lot of these problems is the sunpy package. So the sunpy began in March of 2011 here at NASA Goddard. This is sort of born out of frustrations with the existing IDL ecosystem and the kind of licensing fees that you have to pay to use IDL that I think we're all probably familiar with. The first version of this was released back in 2011, so 13 years ago, which is crazy to think about now. And in 2019, we released version 1.0, and the paper that we published that's associated with this currently has over 200 citations, which in solar physics, in 5 years to have a paper with that many citations is essentially unheard of, and is really, I think, a good testament to, and this is just the screenshot of the citation count from ADS, that sort of shows the uptick in usage that we've seen. And in particular, I think it's telling that sunpy is now for early career researchers, so new grad students, even new postdocs, that sunpy is the sort of default choice for doing solar data analysis in ways that it wouldn't have been in past years. And then just want to emphasize too that this is the package itself is open source, and it's openly, and most importantly, it's openly developed. So we do, as the development team, we're open to contributions from the entire community, and that we do all this work on GitHub and use sort of open communication channels to communicate with each other. And then probably most interestingly for this group, is that all this functionality is built on top of AstroPy. So anywhere we possibly can, we use AstroPy for things like coordinate systems, or coordinate transformations, opening FITS files, dealing with WCS. All that is built on AstroPy. And I just included this snapshot from our mailing list from now nearly 10 years ago. This is me making sort of first contact with the sunpy project, and just as a way to illustrate, the fact that this community is open, makes it easy to get in contact with, makes it easy to contribute, brings in new contributors, and was a crucial part of me being involved in the project. Okay, so what does sunpy actually do? So sunpy, the sunpy package is focused on kind of three core things that I've already alluded to in various ways. So one of the first of those is data search and downloads. Like I said, our data in solar physics is often spread across many different data providers. There is some centralization into something called the Virtual Solar Observatory, which is a really great resource and one that we leverage. But in general, searching for data across this whole landscape is difficult. So we have a sort of a centralized an extendable search interface that's called FIDO, and you can use that search interface to search across many different data providers using different search criteria like time or wavelength, what instrument you're looking at, etc. The second sort of piece of the package are our data containers. We have two main data containers, one for two-dimensional imaging data called MAP, and then another one for one-dimensional time series data that's called time series, as you might expect. So I'll mostly talk about MAP in this talk. So the idea behind these data containers is that we want to hold the data and the metadata together, and when we do operations on the data, like cropping or rotating or rescaling, we want those to be metadata aware. And so we carry the metadata with us and do operations on that metadata as needed. And of course, this also includes things like the WCS or World Coordinate System, which allows us to do the kind of mapping between pixel and world coordinates. And then the third piece of this is coordinate transformations. So like I alluded to, particularly in the context of when we're viewing the sun from many different angles, we have to think much harder about the coordinate system that our observations are in, especially relative to from one observatory relative to the other. And so the ability to do coordinate transformations and connect those back to the pixel locations in our images is really critical. And so we have a fairly sophisticated set of coordinate frames and transformations that are built on top of the AstroPy coordinate transformation framework. Okay, so just wanted to kind of show, now that I've kind of given a high-level overview of what is in the package, just sort of want to show a few examples of how this actually works. So these are just a few code snippets of using this unified search interface, FIDO, that I alluded to. So if I want to go looking for, this is actually looking for the observations that I showed in the movie that I started the talk with, for a particular time range at a particular wavelength. In this case, I'm looking around 29 May of 2018. This is a particular isolated active region that rotated across the disk that coincided with that nice rocket flight that I showed previously. And I want to look and just the 171 angstrom bandpass, and then I want to look for the AIA instrument, which is this high resolution full disk EUV instrument. And so what you can see is that to do this query, I don't have to think about where the data are, where they're like physically located or who's providing them. I can just put in these search criteria, the ones that are relevant to my science, and I can run a query, and what I get back is this table of results. And so what this tells me is that there's one file that corresponds to this particular search criteria, and it gives me some various metadata that are associated with that query. Most importantly, what I can then do is take that query, I can pass it into our fetch method. So we're really leaning heavily into the dog theme here. FIDO fetches data for you. And then when I call that, I get back a list of files that are now downloaded locally to my machine. And so these are FITS files that I then know how to work with. I can then pass those FITS files, the paths to those files directly into my map data structure, and I can use kind of some basic visualization methods that we have attached to map, and this is what I get. So this is an image in at 171 angstroms, again showing plasma that's at about 1 million degrees, as observed by AIA. And what you can see is it has these nice coordinate labels that are provided, and an overlaid coordinate grid. So this is built on top of matplotlib, but uses something called WCS axes, which is again also provided by AstroPy. Similarly, similarly to visualizing the data, I can also access kind of bits of metadata that are associated with my map. These are then pulled from the FITS files. And I can think things like detector, wavelength, when the observation was taken, from where the observation was taken. Additionally, I can also do things like do cutouts on my map, and I can specify those cutouts in terms of the physical coordinates. So I don't have to think about, when I'm doing these cutouts, which pixel or which array index corresponds to which coordinate. I can just specify I want the bounding box to start at this particular physical coordinate. I want to be 500 arc seconds wide and high, and then I can apply that cropping. Additionally, we can do kind of more sophisticated things like tracking an active region across the disk. So this is showing the same active region, but at several different snapshots separated by about 6 hours in each case. And you can see how the active region rotates across the disk as the sun rotates as viewed from Earth. And what I'm doing is I'm drawing a bounding box on each of those, but I'm using some kind of fancy machinery provided by sunpy to track that active region with the differential rotation of the sun, and then drawing a box on each one. And so this can be really important, for example, if I want to build a stack of images for that particular active region, and I want to crop each of them while crop and then reproject those to the same coordinate frame, so I can build a data cube that I can then analyze. For example, I've wanted to look at how some bundle of plasma is changing as a function of time. And so what this shows is just how I can do this using some reprojection and this tracking with the rotation of the sun. And so what I now get back is a set of 4 frames that are in the same coordinate system as they traverse the disk. And this is all done using just these snippets of code that are shown here. So this is actually the code that's being run. Okay, so I've showed you kind of the code parts of sunpy, the core package, but sunpy is more than just the code. So overseeing and kind of coordinating the development of the sunpy package is something called the sunpy project. So this includes both the code, so the core sunpy package, as well as our affiliated packages, which I'll talk about in just a second, but also all the people, so the maintainers. We have a set of community roles and a governance structure that I won't talk about here, but happy to answer questions about. And then we also have our kind of our wider contributor community, and also our user community. So all the scientists or others that are using sunpy are a critical part of the project as well. We also have a presence at various scientific meetings, as well as more software-focused meetings like this one, or the SciPy meetings, or the Python and astronomy meetings. And we also have help to do outreach to the kind of wider solar community or wider heliophysics community through things like summer schools and doing teaching here. So a kind of critical part of all of this is our software ecosystem. So like I alluded to, the sunpy project is not just the core package, and the software component is not just the core package. It's also this set of affiliated packages that we have to do kind of more specific functionality. So we have an affiliated package ecosystem, and we have sort of criteria for evaluating each of those affiliated packages against. So if someone comes in and says, I have this software package that uses sunpy and it works specifically with data from this type of instrument, we say, okay, great. We would love to bring you into kind of this ecosystem. Here are the criteria for evaluating that package against the ecosystem. And the purpose of this process is not to be exclusionary, but to provide some sort of guarantee and interoperability across all the software packages in our ecosystem. So the way that this works is that these software packages go through a review. This all happens in the open. It's sort of similar to, it's not, I guess it's not totally dissimilar to like a JOS submission, the Journal of Open Source Software, if people are familiar with that. We assign someone from the community to do the review. They kind of go through and evaluate based on all these criteria, and then come back to the package author with suggestions. And so as it stands, we have a number of affiliated packages that are maintained both by the project as well as sort of outside community members. And so these range from doing things specific to particular instruments like AIAPI and DKIST, which is a package for operating on data from a recent ground-based telescope in Hawaii, as well as doing more kind of analysis-specific functionality, like doing field extrapolations, or looking at or querying data from specific data sources. And I'll also just briefly mention, I could talk more about this during kind of Q&A, that we are also partnering with an organization called Pi OpenSci to kind of streamline this process too. Okay, I'm out of time, so I'll just leave my summary slide up here and leave it at that. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Yay! So applause and thank you for being on time. That was great. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Yeah, that was a very nice presentation. And it occurs to me that how you do code review would make a really good talk for AAS or for the ADAS conference. So let's maybe talk about that at some point. So go ahead and please stop sharing your screen. Thank you. Yeah, so if you would be interested in doing something like that. So thanks very much. So next up is Nick Murphy. So Nick, go ahead and share your screen. Nick is with the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, and he's presenting PlasmaPy, which is a Python library for plasma research and education. And it provides core functionality and a common framework for data visualization and analysis for plasma physics. Nick, thank you very much, and go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's great to be here. I'm here not just on behalf of myself, but also I think we have about 120, 130 contributors now to PlasmaPy, and this list is just of some of them. And in particular, I want to congratulate Elliot Johnson, who graduated, or who defended his thesis on Monday. And a lot of his research was based on functionality that he added to PlasmaPy, which was very exciting. All right. So I wanted to give some motivation and talk about the scope of PlasmaPy and why we decided to do it. And the short answer is because plasma science is awesome and amazing and really cool, and also really hot sometimes. So plasma physics is core to heliophysics. All of the images that Will showed were of solar plasmas. And it's also the case that almost all of the baryonic matter in the universe is a plasma. Astronomers often talk about interstellar gas, but I'll contend that there's almost no such thing as interstellar gas unless you go to like protoplanetary disks where cosmic rays can't get into. It's pretty much all interstellar plasma. Plasma physics is also vital to fusion energy sciences. And there are two main branches of that. There's laser-produced plasmas, inertial confinement fusion. And one example of that is the National Ignition Facility, which has a bunch of lasers shooting pellets of deuterium and tritium. And you get a lot of released energy that way. They set some new records in the last year or two. And there's also magnetic confinement energy, and examples of that are tokamaks and stellarators and other devices. And these tokamaks in particular are toroidal devices like donuts that the plasma is confined using magnetic fields. There are also a lot of areas of plasma technology. So plasma physics is used for spacecraft propulsion. One of the coolest is that plasma chemistry can be used for water purification. And there's a great review article by John Foster in 2017 that goes over all of this. And then there are even medical applications for plasma science, using plasmas for things like wound sterilization and cancer treatments. So plasma science is an incredibly broad field, and PlasmaPy doesn't have functionality to cover everything here, but the scope that our goal is to cover broadly needed functionality across all of these subdisciplines. Right, so what is PlasmaPy? And I'll start off by saying that the mission of the PlasmaPy project is to grow a fully open source software ecosystem for plasma research and education. And the work that we're doing has been directly inspired by AstroPy and sunpy. We would not exist if not for either or both of these packages. So AstroPy began in 2011 after a proliferation of separate open source astronomical Python packages. It's interesting to go back and read the original email chain that inspired AstroPy. And sunpy, as we just heard about, plays a similar role in solar physics. And we began PlasmaPy to fill this gap in plasma science. So the short version of this talk is PlasmaPy, our goal is to create an AstroPy for plasma physics. And so what does a software ecosystem include? And people familiar with AstroPy probably have a good idea of this. So PlasmaPy itself is, we have a core package, and it contains functionality that is needed across subdisciplines. And we just released version 2024.5.0 last week. And one note is that I'm trying to get broccoli to be used as a celebratory emoji, in part because this is a STEM field. So we're also doing our best to connect to astronomy and the heliopythoniverse. Please use that word. I'm trying to get it to catch on. So PlasmaPy, a lot of our functionality is based heavily on astropy.units, and which has been incredibly helpful. And PlasmaPy is also a core package in the Python and heliophysics community, alongside sunpy and spacepy, PySpeedS, and several other amazing packages. A software ecosystem also needs to contain educational resources, and our documentation covers not just the functionality that PlasmaPy has, but docstrings often describe the underlying physics. So whenever I forget the physics behind the lower hybrid frequency, which is always, I can go to the docstring for that, and someone besides me ended up adding a description of that physics, which can be really helpful. And we also have a gallery of example Jupyter notebooks, which we'll talk a little bit more later. A software ecosystem also, the most important part of it is the community surrounding it. And this is another thing that Will talked about with regards to sunpy. And we have weekly community meetings, weekly virtual office hours, and a matrix chat group. And we also abide by the Contributor Covenant Code of Conduct. So to give some highlights of what we can do with PlasmaPy, probably the most broadly applicable is that we can create particle and particleist objects that can be used to represent the different particles and ions and atoms that show up in plasmas. We can also use PlasmaPy to calculate various plasma parameters. There's a famous resource in plasma physics, the NRL Plasma Formulary, which contains, I think it's like 40 pages. It's a small booklet of formulas for calculating things like the gyro radius and alphane speed, and so on. And PlasmaPy, a bunch of us fairly early on added a lot of these functions into it. There's also a particle tracker. So we can define electromagnetic fields and place them on a grid. And then we have a particle tracker class, which was recently revamped by an undergraduate at the University of Rochester, Jaden Roberts. And we can use that to track particle motions. We can also find plasma wave dispersion relationships. And plasma waves are kind of a mess. There are a whole bunch of different plasma waves, and there are different types of plasma waves in different regimes. And we have dispersion relation solvers for 2-fluid and MHD waves, and we want to expand this further. Another undergraduate a few years ago now created a prototype magnetic null point finder. So null points are locations where the magnetic field equals 0, and they're important in magnetic reconnection. So when magnetic field lines come together, cancel each other out, and release a lot of energy. And so this is a really nice prototype tool that we are hoping to expand. So the functionality that Elliot Johnson, our newly minted doctor, created was to calculate the thermalization ratio for solar wind plasma. So if you have alpha particles and protons that start out at different temperatures, which they do in the solar wind, you can measure how much the temperature changes due to collisions between particles. So this is some really nice functionality that he added. So thank you, Elliot. We also have some representations of plasma equilibria, not complete so far, but mostly 1D equilibria like Harris sheets and the Lundquist solution for force-free magnetic flux ropes, which comes up a lot in heliophysics to represent interplanetary coronal mass ejections. We also have some ability to analyze data from plasma experiments, and I'll list a few of these. Langmuir probes are used in fairly low temperature plasma experiments where the probes won't actually get destroyed by the plasma. And then Thomson scattering and synthetic proton radiography are used in high energy density physics. So we have example notebooks that go through all of these. So I'll mention the subpackages that PlasmaPy has. Our particle subpackage, which is probably my favorite, includes object-oriented representations of particles. So things like the particle list and particle objects, as well as functionality to access basic particle properties. So particles is pretty applicable to a lot of astronomy and solar physics and other fields as well. The formulas from the NRL Plasma Formulary are in our formulary subpackage, which it only took us about a year to think of the name for that. And it also includes things for the horrible plasma transport coefficients that come up a lot in fusion energy. And our dispersion subpackage contains dispersion relation solvers for plasma waves, as I mentioned earlier. Our analysis and diagnostic subpackages contain analysis techniques, and then for things like simulation experiments and observations, and then the ability to analyze and represent different plasma diagnostics that are used mostly in the laboratory. And also have some utilities in the util subpackage for the rest of PlasmaPy. So I think this is my only example of code here, but if we want to create a particle object, we can import it from plasmapy.particles and then give the particle class a representation of a particle. And it's pretty flexible here, so you could spell out proton or just have a lowercase p, or in this case, I use p+. And so this will create a proton object. And the proton has attributes like mass, and proton.mass will end up returning an astro-pi quantity. We also have some helper functionality so that if we want to figure out if proton is a baryon, we can use the isCategory method and figure that out. And often in plasmas, we'll have more than one type of particle at once. And so we can create a particle list where we give it a list or an iterable containing multiple representations of particles. And we can get things like helium ions. And PlasmaPy does recognize a lot of the Unicode symbols as well. So an alpha symbol will create an alpha particle. And then it'll have the particle list object will have attributes also. So if we want to get the charges of these multiple particles, we can do that with the charge attribute. The particle list class is particularly nice because with it, we're able to calculate plasma parameters for multiple particles at once within PlasmaPy.formulary. It's not the implementation is not complete yet, but we've got all of the most common functionality compatible with particle list objects. So that's been really helpful. Early on in the project, one of my favorite reviews from a former student working with me was, "Your code has documentation." And that I took as a very high compliment. We've put a lot of time into our documentation. So it's worth checking out to get a better idea of what PlasmaPy can do. Our documentation also has about 30 example notebooks, and there's some examples here like that are solar physics relevant, like plasma beta in the solar atmosphere, or space physics, like plasma parameters in Earth's magnetosphere, as well as for laboratory plasmas, like analyzing ITER parameters, where ITER is the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor that's being built in France as the next generation tokamak. So there's a lot of, so PlasmaPy itself has pretty broad applicability. I want to talk about a bunch of the challenges that PlasmaPy, I think, is facing more than projects like AstroPy and probably sunpy as well. And our biggest challenge has been onboarding new contributors. And there are a lot of reasons behind that. The biggest is that it's difficult to learn Git and GitHub, in part because it's rarely covered in Plasma coursework. And to counter that, we ended up holding a virtual Plasma Hack Week during the pandemic twice, which included a lot of tutorials on Git and GitHub, software testing, and provided a chance in the second year for participants to produce a hack formulary, to add their own formulary functions to a repository we set up for the Hack Week. We also put a lot of time into creating an extensive contributor guide. And the contributor guide includes things like the code contribution workflow, as well as a coding guide, so coding best practices and conventions and things like that, which contains more guidelines than rules. And we also put a lot of work into writing a testing guide and a documentation guide. And since it's open source, if there are parts of the contributor guide that other projects would like to adopt, feel free to do so under the terms of our BSD 3-clause license. So the question then is, where can we, in plasma science especially, learn research software engineering skills, like how to contribute to an open source project? And we're excited to announce that we're having a summer school this summer at the end of July and beginning of August at Bryn Mawr College. And the main topic will be how to contribute to PlasmaPy, as well as other open source projects. And we do have an NSF award supporting the development of PlasmaPy. And as part of that, we have travel funding available for participants. So the applications are due on May 24th. And you can go to this website to get more information. I'll put a link to that. I'll try to put a link to that after I'm done presenting. So another challenge is changing the culture of plasma science, and within PlasmaPy in particular, and then building community. So community is an absolutely vital component to open source projects. But plasma physics has a terrible track record on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility among all divisions in the American Physical Society. Plasma physics has, for example, the worst representation of women, less than 10%. And only in the last few years has there been much effort, much visible effort in the community to change this, but we are working on it. But in PlasmaPy itself, we're working hard to build a foundation of psychological safety. And psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished for speaking up with ideas, questions, or concerns, or making minor mistakes. So one example is that if we don't feel comfortable sharing code, chances are we're lacking psychological safety in that moment. So how do we ensure psychological safety in our community and in particular in code review? And so that's a question which would probably take a long time to address. And the last challenge that I'll mention is the plasma science data environment. In heliophysics and astronomy, it's pretty common to make data sets from observations openly available. I can't even think of a single closed data source for solar physics. But in plasma science and fusion energy, closed data is the norm. And there is almost no culture of open data sharing. We have made some progress. In the last few years, I was able to add the word almost into the sentence. There are a few examples of data being shared for some tokamaks, for one tokamak in particular. So plasma fusion energy sciences need, it'd really be great to have a community-wide portal to access fusion and plasma data sets, something that we can, so that we can have a tool like Fido from sunpy where we can search for and download data. And we also need open metadata standards. This is something that I spent a lot of time talking about in plasma physics. And it turns out that open metadata standards can be sung to the theme song of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the cartoon from the 1980s. And we ended up making stickers for this that we hand out at conferences. At one meeting, I ended up handing out like PlasmaPy and open metadata standard stickers and ran out of the open metadata standard stickers first. So a metadata standard is an agreed upon way to structure and understand data. And the way that we do that is to assign a specific meaning for each variable name. And if we had that in plasma science, it would be incredibly helpful for making it so that different facilities can work together in terms of software and data. It'd make our lives really easier in plasma physics. So I want to finish with some final thoughts.
You have 1 minute. You have 1 minute.
I'm good. So PlasmaPy is directly inspired by AstroPy and sunpy. And so thank you so much to everyone from the AstroPy and sunpy communities. We really appreciate it. We learned a lot from all of you. And PlasmaPy would not exist if not for these projects. But also PlasmaPy is not yet feature complete. And our future depends on community contributions, which is why we're holding the summer school this summer. And finally, please feel free to schedule a meeting with me over this Calendly link. I'll put it in the chat also, if I remember. And it'll set up a Zoom link and all that. And I'm happy to talk more with any of you about that. So with that, I'm finished. And thank you again.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was great. Thanks so much. Yay. So I'm going, and I'll point out that both of these projects have been very good about letting people know how these software packages should be cited. That's really important to specify your preferred citation if you're running a software, if you have a software package that you want or expect or hope that other people will use, let people know how they should cite it and make that information easy to find. That's my soapbox for today. And I love the stickers and I love Fido and all that stuff. These were two very fun talks, very interesting, and for me, also fun to listen to because you guys are funny. So so I want to go ahead and give Michael the floor because he's going to run questions. So take it away.
Yeah. Happy to do questions. So reminder, if you have questions, do drop them in the chat. There are comments of your stickers that they are the best sticker ever. So I imagine if you get those things printed up, you could fund your retirement off of it. I'll start while I wait for people to post some questions. You gave a very nice discussion about how hard it is to onboard new contributors, especially, Git is not the most intuitive piece of software ever written. And so how it's important to have these training events. And so your summer school really sounds like a nice idea. I'm wondering, Will, with sunpy, have you had similar experiences just getting people over that initial hurdle of feeling comfortable, if you can comment on that?
Yes, 100%. Everything that Nick said applies to us as well. I think we've actually had historically not great track record about bringing new, like converting users to contributors, and especially like contributors to kind of more core maintainers. So our user base, as I alluded to during the talk, has grown substantially in the past several years, but our contributor base has not, and especially kind of the contributors who've made more than one contribution to sunpy has been relatively flat, for all the reasons that Nick has alluded to. I think culturally in solar physics, it's not it's not the same as in plasma science. I think it's very similar to the kind of wider astronomy community, but just for various reasons we've not been very successful at that conversion.
Okay. Both of you also highlight how you leverage other packages. So Nick mentioned both sunpy and astropy, and Will, you mentioned astropy, I think, for coordinates and units. Are there times when maybe developing a new feature, you have to think about, hey, does it belong in my package, or is this something for upstream? And is there coordination amongst all of you? So Nick is shaking his head, so maybe.
Yeah. So sunpy and PlasmaPy are both part of the Python and heliophysics community. And so we do have discussions there about like where functionality should go. And also, even more than that, like how to make the packages interoperable with each other. It's a little difficult because these packages mostly came into being before the Python heliophysics community started. So we often went our own separate ways. And so it's trying to bring us together now. But yeah, we do have these discussions, and not just with like each other, but there's some functionality in PlasmaPy which I keep thinking maybe you should go into SciPy since it's even more general.
Yeah, I will say that I definitely agree with regards to this is a whole nother extended discussion, but within heliophysics as a whole, there's a lot of work to be done to increase interoperability and avoid duplication of effort. In terms of the sunpy astropy relationship, I think is actually very constructive and very. So several of the core sunpy developers are also core contributors to astropy, and historically we've had very good, like a very good sort of feedback loop between the two packages. So things have gone upstream and downstream. Though we do occasionally there are several features in the package where it's like, okay, maybe this would be better placed in astropy. But overall, actually, I think that relationship has worked out quite well.
Great.
Yeah. There have been like once or twice where I did contribute something to astropy, which I ended up needing in PlasmaPy, so like the physical type class, which is really fun. I enjoyed contributing to astropy then.
Great. We have a few questions. Clement asks, does PlasmaPy need astropy for anything other than astropy units?
So right now, the functionality within PlasmaPy itself, astropy.units is the main thing. there are some possibilities in the future also, like for using astropy.time and astropy.modeling. But I'm also open to learning more about astropy since my knowledge of astropy is incomplete. Oh, and we also use some of the package infrastructure from astropy. We used to use astropy helpers. Oh, that brings me back. And then there's like a PyTest extension that astropy wrote that that I just am adding to PlasmaPy also.
Great. Timothy asks, it sounds like PlasmaPy is oriented towards heliophysics in particular, and it sounds like fusion plasmas are another big focus. Are there any areas of plasma science that are less developed in the code, but which you, Nick, or the development team are hoping to build capability for?
Yes, absolutely. Our functionality for every subdiscipline is still in progress. We're still working on it. We started off with an overabundance of heliophysicists at the beginning of the project, probably because of sunpy. And our grant was from NSF, which typically doesn't like funding fusion energy. So we have less on, in particular, magnetic confinement fusion than we really should have. So magnetic confinement fusion, like tokamaks, that's one big focus. The other parts are like plasma technology, plasma chemistry. So the applications like water purification using plasma science. It'd be really great to have more functionality in here as well. And please raise issues if there are features that you would like. It's incredibly helpful.
Do you two have questions for each other? I imagine you two interact quite a bit, so.
We do, yes.
All right.
Actually, Nick, I was going to ask, is there an affiliated package ecosystem for PlasmaPy, or is that on the horizon?
That is on the horizon, and it's been on the horizon for a while. And part of that is trying to change the culture within plasma science. There are some packages that, like Fiasco is a package that Will started and wrote most of, and I helped out a bit on, to access data from the Chianti Atomic Database. It's really nice. And so that's one example of something that would fall in the Plasma Pythoniverse. That works too. But we really want to get people from different parts of the community, so like different facilities, to create their own Python packages so that they have control over like the ways to read in the data. Oh, there is one package like that for the basic plasma science facility. I forgot about that. So there's a bit, but it's much more in progress than sunpy and especially astropy. Very good questions.
I can see that being sort of analogous to like the instrument specific packages that we have in like the affiliate package ecosystem, like having specific facilities for this is how you ingest our data into some sort of like common data model or abstraction or something like that.
Yes, hence these stickers.
Right. Yes, of course.
Alrighty. I think we're running out of time, and we've had some good questions. Both of you gave wonderful presentations, so it's nice to hear about both of these projects. Both are stuff that I've been curious about for quite some time. So if there's no more questions, then we'll say that's it.
I would like to ask Nick whether his slides are going to be online somewhere.
Oh,
or if we can host them.
I will put them on Zenodo later today and send you a link for that.
That would be great. Thank you so much. I think it's very helpful to have the slide decks in addition to the talk, to the recording of the talks.
And then just a reminder, we're always looking for future talks. Raise an issue on our vast GitHub page about a talk you might want to give. We're starting to think about things like machine learning and such. So please let us know. And this talk will be up on our webpage once we get the recording processed. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I'm going to stop recording now.